Yeah, so I mentioned the Minas Passage, and the Minas Passage is exceptionally well suited for tidal power generation. It's probably the best place in the world. So why? Well, it has the world's highest tides. So the tides up in the tip there of the Bay of Fundy are 16, 17 meters. So you get massive amounts of water flowing, and again, the tidal cycle in that location, it's 4 times a day. So every 6 hours you go from high tide to low tide and back, just over 6 hours.
Hello, I'm Herb Simmons, and welcome to the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and today we have a special program that focuses on a different kind of power and energy that we don't usually think about. It's tidal power, and many of us think that it could well be the next big wave in renewable energy. And so I hope you'll stay with us as we explore what it is, what the possibilities are, what the obstacles are, and how it can help bring about a brighter and healthier future for us. And with that, I'm happy to introduce, as always, Paul Beckwith. Paul is a climate system scientist in Ottawa, Canada. He is a longtime YouTuber who has presented over 1,000 videos on every aspect of the climate crisis. And I understand you may have actually been somewhere near where tidal power may be relevant. The floor is yours, Paul. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Herb. So I was fortunate enough to have a vacation just last week at the Bay of Fundy National Park, where I went on numerous hikes along the coastline of the Bay of Fundy, and it's just amazing geography there. Very, very tall cliffs, and actually learned how to rappel 150 feet down one of those cliffs when the tide was low. And when I was in New Brunswick last week, I filmed a 20-minute video, will be on my channel shortly, on the tide coming in. At low tide, I walked out as far as I could to where the ocean was, and I filmed this video as the tide was coming up. And it came up at about half walking speed. If you get an extremely flat ocean bottom, it can come up much faster, faster than people can run actually, and that's a hazard to some people, getting caught in the ocean because the tide comes up too quickly. It comes up that fast. I mean, at my location, it was coming up at about half walking speed. And it was interesting because you get a whole series of small waves, and it's like a wave comes up and reaches the extent on the beach, but then does not recede. And then the next wave comes up and surpasses the first one, pushing closer towards you. And then that doesn't recede. And then the next one comes up. So one of the things is it's loud, right? You're down there at the beach, and it's not like the normal beach, just wave action, but it's a continuous small sound, background sound of these small wavelets building up and building up. So that's how the tide comes in. So interestingly, near Moncton, there's what's called a tidal
Absolutely
bore,
perfect.
where the water is restricted in width, and you end up getting this massive wave coming up near Moncton, maybe yeah, a foot high, maybe several feet high, depending on the time of year and conditions. It's interesting because, Charles and Heidi were there and they saw the tidal bore and have this film clip of this guy surfing as the tidal bore is coming up the river. So this is a very fascinating phenomenon. Also, the power of the water is huge. So it causes in New Brunswick, there's lots of sharp cliffs along the ocean coast. And because of these massive tides, these
Amazing.
sandstone cliffs experience huge erosion and often collapses. So it's very dangerous to walk right underneath the cliffs because rocks are going to be falling periodically. I was lucky enough to learn how to rappel down one of these 150-foot cliffs with my wife on my trip. And often people find fossils because pieces of the cliff break off. But also there's interesting artifacts like sea stacks. There's some harder rock that doesn't erode as quickly as the softer rock. So it's left sort of sitting there So Hopewell Rocks is a perfect example of these sea stacks. And also I went to St. David's, I believe it's called, where there's sea caves. So I'm also, if you watch my video list, I'm going to post these sea caves where there's huge caves in the coastline rock. So 150, 200 foot high cliff, a big, huge, gaping cave at the bottom of it, which fills completely at high tide. I walked right inside one of these things at low tide and filmed it. It's like this massive cave. It's fascinating phenomena that results from the very, very high ocean tides in this region. The tide changes every 6 hours and a bit based on the lunar cycle, not an Earth day, so 4 times a day. And in the Bay of Fundy, up near the tip of the bay, the maximum tidal change is, I believe, 17 meters or 57 feet. As the bay widens and you go further out, it decreases. There's a huge amplification resonant effect. So because of the timing of the tides, the distances involved in the bay, the way water moves, surges, you get a huge amplification of what normal ocean tides would be on other coastlines. And you get the world's highest tides in the Bay of Fundy. There's a huge potential for power generation. It's probably the best in the world, in particular in an area of the Bay of Fundy called the Minas Passage area. The potential is about 7,000 to 8,000 megawatts of power, which is 7 to 8 gigawatts, which is enormous. It's enough power to power 2 or 3 million homes, actually. The actual commercially likely potential so that you don't disrupt the tides themselves, et cetera, is about 2.5 gigawatts. So the potential 7 or 8, but about 2.5 is probably practical without disrupting the flows. I did film a video, a 20-minute long video, when I was running away as the tide was approaching me. Like I would stand in one spot and soon be covered with water and have to retreat. In Bay of Fundy, they have a project called FORCE, FORCE, which stands for Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy, where they do research on tidal power generation and also pilot projects. And they have a small project that's tied into the grid. But we don't have large scale commercial tidal power in the Bay of Fundy, and it's a shame because it's a massive potential. I mean, there are technical challenges to tidal power. The main ones are you get extreme turbulence and powerful currents, often unpredictable turbulent flow. So turbine blades are subject to rapid twisting and bending stresses, which can shorten their life and break off blades. And of course, the stresses are about 1,000 times greater for tidal turbines rather than wind turbines, just because of the density of water being about 1,000 times more than the density of air. You can also get debris and ice affecting the turbine blades, so ice blocks in the winter in the Bay of Fundy, and also seabed detritus, weeds, etc., year round. So the durability and robustness of these devices, has to be quite large to give them a decent lifetime. So as a result, you're working in a marine environment, so high cost, financial risk, environmental effects and monitoring, how do they affect marine life, whales, etc. How do you install the turbines? How do you maintain them? You need electrical cables running on the seafloor to carry power away from them. So you have to install those. So those are all sort of technical issues. But that being said, there are some massive tidal power projects existing in the world. You can just go and Google or use an AI search top 10 tidal power projects in the world. And they're about the 254 megawatt or about a quarter of a gigawatt. The biggest is in South Korea. There's a huge, next is in France, Wales, Scotland, England, Swansea has one next to the nuclear plant. Those are all about 240, 250 megawatts. And then from there it goes downwards. There's a big one in Annapolis, the Bay of Fundy, but that's about 1/10 the size of the biggest one. So they do exist. It's mostly through a method called tidal barrage, where you build like a dam structure and you have turbines. So as the tide goes in and out, the water flows through the turbines, creating power. So there's a lot of potential for this technology. We're not utilizing it anywhere near as much as we could.
Thanks, Paul. I'm wondering whether the citizens of the area near the bay whether they have played any role in supporting or opposing a project like the one you're describing?
The population density is really, really small in the Maritimes around the
Hmm.
Bay of Fundy. So I don't think there's been public like opposition. I think if projects were going to change the nature of the tides, there'd be an uproar. But I think huge amounts of power can be extracted with no noticeable difference to the tides in the Bay of Fundy.
Hmm. So if you were right there at the bay, at the water's edge, and this facility was in place, would you see it? Would you hear it? Would you smell it? Would you taste it? In other words, what visual and other impacts might it have?
No, like I mentioned, this Minas Bay, which is, I think, Minas Passage. It's a narrow passage in the far tip of the bay. And it's the best place because that's where the tides are 57 feet. If you go down to wider parts of the bay, might only get 45 feet, 40 feet, something like that. So the best place would be up there. You could do it in an area where people weren't around really. It depends on the method. Like you could do it at a reservoir that has daily fluctuation from the tide. You could do it at the narrow choke point of that, like a lagoon. So tidal barrage is the most common, like the dam-like structure, and that could be far out away from the coastline. If it's a tidal lagoon, you need to do it at the entrance exit to the lagoon. You could do it in a river, that's known as tidal stream technology. Most of the largest sites around the world are tidal barrage, is what they call it, a dam-like structure or a barrage built across an entrance or a constriction. So mostly it's not that visible to the public. And like I said, you just choose a place where nobody lives at the moment.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. I'm happy to introduce now Dr. Peter Carter. Peter is a regular on the Climate Emergency Forum. He lives in the Vancouver area. He's a retired medical doctor, and he founded and operates and runs the Climate Emergency Institute. He's also been an expert reviewer for the IPCC. Welcome, Peter.
Hi. Well, I have a little personal experience on tidal power, which may be a bit amusing. Paul mentioned barrages, and indeed, that's the first way that goes way, way back of trying to extract tidal power. When I was a boy in England, they tried it over the River Severn. They had these great big steel square thing. Well, it didn't last any time at all. As Paul points out, the ocean is a very, very hard nut to crack with regards to power. But of course, the power potential for the ocean is absolutely massive. I mean, it's practically endless, right? My other experience is that some years ago, when I was changing my investments into renewable energy, I found what looked like a very attractive renewable tidal up and down. They were huge steel things that went up and down and produced electricity. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, I'm going to make a lot of money on that. Well, actually, that's the only investment in which I lost my money. All of the other investments, I'm glad to say, have done extremely well. Of course, every year we have publications of energy, and the best one probably is the Statistical View of World Energy, and there's a new one this year in 2025. The tidal doesn't show up, right? It's so small it doesn't show up. The only number I could find was about 1.5% of total energy production. So it's tiny. There are some fascinating projects around there. Scotland seems to be an area which is most successful, and it's using its islands. And between the islands, Shetland Islands, there's flow, constrained flow, which it can use, and it has a number of upside down turbines, which is tested successfully so far. I think that probably the most exciting one, again, Scotland's already tested it and proven it's going to work fine. It was developed out of Sweden, and it's kites. So there's kites on a tether, and these kites sort of go round and round and round. Looks like that's the most hopeful one. So they go underwater a small amount. They sort of look like a drone. Kind of look like a drone. They're not huge, but they're not small. There's huge amounts of research into tidal power, and the technological development, the science has increased very, very, very rapidly. So there's a huge amount of interest, a huge amount of research, and that's grown very rapidly. So far, it hasn't translated into clean energy power, but it will. It's bound to, like all the other renewable energies are increasing. So I should mention that the good news is that last year was another record year for renewable energy. Renewable energy has been increasing at an accelerating rate. That's very healthy. I think it's about doubled since 2000 or 2010. The IEA Renewable Energy report was very, very, very good to read and very optimistic. I remember that MIT, a hopeful, what looked like a very smart research program on tidal power using sort of small devices that went up and down with the waves, and just a little up and down movement, which looked relatively small. The researchers said, well, we could actually produce significant amount of energy from that. Of course, we're talking electricity, okay? We're not talking total energy, although in theory, there's no reason why wave and tidal power can't produce high energy dense power so that you can do the melting of aluminum and steel and transport and aviation and all that stuff. Yeah, I think it looks very, very hopeful for, but we have to have two things. And of course, one thing is what we're doing now. We have to have a huge amount of public interest, right? Because we have to have massive increase in investment. I mean, the investment in ocean energy is tiny. So that's what we need. So the public and ourselves and hopefully the scientists could drive that interest and drive the investment into ocean power.
Thank you, Peter. I think the one advantage, at least in theory, is the fact that in most cases you will not have citizen opposition, since it's not near where citizens live and recreate. And that's why I was asking Paul about that for the Bay of Fundy. So let me turn it back to you, Paul.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Minas Passage, and the Minas Passage is exceptionally well suited for tidal power generation. It's probably the best place in the world. So why? Well, it has the world's highest tides. So the tides up in the tip there of the Bay of Fundy are 16, 17 meters. So you get massive amounts of water flowing, and again, the tidal cycle in that location, it's 4 times a day. So every 6 hours you go from high tide to low tide and back, just over 6 hours. It's a narrow channel. The Minas Passage, it's less than 5 kilometers wide, 15 kilometers long. So it funnels the water. So the water moves at very high speeds, exceeding 5 meters per second or 18 kilometers an hour, which is extremely fast for ocean currents. It's probably the fastest in the world. And that's very critical because tidal power increases with the cube of the water speed. So if you double the water speed, you get 8 times as much power. So it's huge. I mean, it's ideal for tidal power. You get billions of tons of water flowing through the passage every tide, which is every 6 hours. So you got a very consistent, predictable energy source. The site is ideal. The water is 45 meters deep at low tide. It's sediment free. The ocean floor is bedrock, so you get far fewer weeds and detritus and debris. You get relatively straight, strong currents. So it's perfect for tidal turbine. And alone, the Minas Passage could generate up to even 7 gigawatts of power. So when I mentioned the potential for the whole Bay of Fundy, the vast majority of that potential is just in this one small region, one basin. So it's a holy grail of tidal power because of its huge, powerful currents. It's tidal range, fast and predictable currents, favorable underwater topography, the seafloor. It's one of the best places in the world for tidal power generation. So we could do it. And also, once we generate the power, it could easily supply power to many of the maritime provinces.
Thanks, Paul. You certainly painted a very compelling picture for why that site should be developed and all of the advantages that it has, both the physical characteristics and its locational characteristics. Let me turn it back to Peter.
Thanks. Another really great idea, which I remember reading about. I don't know if it's been pursued, but the UK has done some field experiments on it. And that is to get around the smashing effect of the ocean on whatever you put in to develop energy, is to make artificial lagoons, right? You make these lagoons off your shore where your tidal or wave is good. Then you can develop your ocean energy with a lot more freedom. So that is a great idea. I remember there's as Paul has indicated, there's massive potential for tidal power. One of the great things is that the locations of high tidal power opportunity, they're around every continent. Every continent has them. The UK, of course, is relatively small, but that's very high. Some good news is that the country with the most tidal power potential off its coast, by far the most, is China. So, of course, China's achieving absolute amazing breakthroughs on all sorts of renewable energy. 2025, I looked this up, for breakthroughs on renewable energy. It is going to be a record-breaking year for sure on renewable energy breakthroughs. So, we hear a lot of downers from world leaders who like fossil fuel energy and don't like renewable energy. But I think so far that's not having any effect on the research and the potential for tidal power. I repeat again, the investment is not there. What we're seeing happening is that there will be no reduction in the production of fossil fuel, planet-destroying fossil fuel energy. There's no push whatsoever from any sector to change that. Now, in actual fact, this makes it even more important that we produce rapidly all the renewable energy we possibly can, right? Because fossil fuels are going to crash and they're going to bring a lot of us down with them. And we then, in order to survive, will depend on the renewable energy that we have in place and that we can then hopefully build very rapidly. So our future indeed does depend on developing all of the renewable energy potentials, particularly the ocean, because it's so massive, and to develop that fast. And the only way for that is to put money into it.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm actually speaking today from the scene of the Global Tipping Points Conference in Exeter, England. We've had many really important discussions the last 3 days about not only the negative climate tipping points that certainly we have and will be discussing on this program, such as the collapse of the Amazon, the AMOC, and monsoons and so forth, but also what is labeled as positive tipping points. And when we get to a certain point where electric vehicles achieve a certain percentage of the market, we're getting very close to that, the progress will then be almost inexorable. And similarly with respect to other forms and opportunities for renewable energy. So that's just to second your comment, Peter. Let me thank Peter and Paul for a really important discussion about a potential source of energy and electricity we don't think about very much, but which we hope will become high on the priority list of citizens and world leaders. So with that, I want to ask those of you who are watching this to like this program, to go to our website, climateemergencyforum.org, to subscribe to our channel, to tell your friends and colleagues about our work, to leave some comments, to leave some suggestions for us for future programs. Certainly we'll be having one or more programs based upon what's happened here in Exeter. And with that, as always, I want to thank you for watching, and we will see you next week. Thank you.